Work Program. Oh, I'll say that again. So welcome to the Boston Region MPO Unified Planning Work Program Committee meeting. I'm calling the meeting to order. First, we'll read the virtual meeting guidelines here. So all participants will join the meeting with muted microphones. Please rename yourself to include your first name, last name, and affiliation. Participants can mute and unmute themselves. To participate in the discussion, please select the raise hand function by either clicking on the participants button at the bottom of the screen, and a window will pop up with the raise hand button or the reactions button in the toolbar. And the chair will then call on participants. If you are dialing in by phone, you can use *9 to raise your hand. And if you have any technical difficulties, please contact Srilekha Murthy via the chat box or smurthy@ctps.org via email or by phone at 857-702-3705. So the meeting is being recorded today, and this meeting is accessible to people with disabilities. Zoom products are compliant with exceptions to the following standards: Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.1, Level AA standards, and revised Section 508 standards. If you require any additional accommodations in order to participate fully, please contact Srilekha Murthy via the chat box or via email at smurthy@ctps.org or by calling 857-702-3705. So with that, we can do introductions. So I will take a roll call of committee members who are present. So my name is Derek Cravat, chair of the UPWP committee and Boston MPO liaison at MassDOT Office of Transportation Planning. Do we have MAPC here?
Hey, good morning. This is Eric Barassa with Metropolitan Area Planning Council.
Eric. Town of Arlington, Daniel Amstutz.
Daniel Amstutz here for Town of Arlington. Thanks.
City of Boston, Transportation Department. Don't see anybody. City of Framingham. Okay, Town of Medway. Okay, City of Newton, David Kozis.
David Kozis, Newton Public Works Department.
Okay. Town of Norwood, Tom O'Rourke.
Steve Olenoff, representing the Trick subregion.
Great, morning, Steve. City of Somerville, Tom Bent.
Tom Bent, City of Somerville, and the representing Intercore.
Great, and I see Len Diggins from RTAC.
It is me. Thank you.
Morning. And then MBTA Advisory Board, Amira Patterson.
Amira Patterson, good morning, representing the MBTA Advisory Board.
Great. All right, good morning, folks. And I also see Laura Gilmore from the MBTA. You're not a voting member, but just wanted to say hello, and Ben Meller as well from MassDOT District 6, so welcome. So with that, I think we can move to the next agenda item, which is public comments. Are there any members of the public present that wish to make a comment at this time? Seeing none, if you do have any comments, you can raise your hand at any time throughout the meeting, or you can provide them via email to staff by emailing Srilekha Murthy, smurthy@ctps.org. Great, so I don't think we have the meeting summary from last time, so we can go ahead and get right back into the discussion of federal fiscal year 2023 universe of proposed studies. So I think this is kind of where we left off. I can hand it over to Srilekha to continue that discussion.
Sure. Thank you, Derek. And good morning, everyone. So at our last meeting, we left off at TE2, it's Transit Equity Project 2, equity analysis of demand response transit in the Boston region. This study was submitted by MassDOT's Office of Transportation Planning and aims to study whether demand response transit services meet the needs of the elderly and those with poor or limited access to essential services. So because this was submitted by OTP and Derek, would you be able to speak a little bit more on the study?
Yeah, absolutely. So this one was proposed largely based on the recent federal emphasis areas that we received from US DOT with the new bipartisan infrastructure law. They typically send with it every new piece of legislation, kind of these emphasis areas, and one of them was to target demand response service toward communities with higher concentrations of older adults and people with limited access to essential services. And so I know that there is sort of a great deal of demand response of transit service in the region, and a number of municipalities have been working with VIA and other vendors to do demand response service, as well as obviously the T, whether it's the ride or other service providers. And so I think this study is just meant to get a lay of the land a little bit of whether there might be sort of gaps in the region that might not be getting served by these providers for demand response service, and I guess just generally who that service is serving, and whether it could be expanded to better connect folks to opportunities that need it. So that was some of the motivation behind this one, just sort of doing an equity analysis of that service that currently exists in line with that federal guidance. So I know that, this would have to be, of course, fleshed out a bit more with the T folks. And, I know that there's staff dedicated to paratransit service and others. So there might be work done on this already. So of course, I'd recommend meeting with, I know Laura, we've been in touch about chatting more about these ones offline. So happy to have those follow-up conversations, but curious about any other thoughts that committee members might have at this time. Yeah, go ahead, Len.
Thanks. Well, yeah, I mean, I'm very much in favor of this. I mean, the price certainly seems right. Although I know it's going to sound ironic, it's a little lower than I would have expected, but that's fine. That's totally okay. Something that tends to fly under the radar with us on the board, I think, here is the Coordinated Human Transportation Services Plan that runs parallel to the Long Range Transportation Plan. I mean, this seems like, I think if we could coordinate this plan with what they do, to find out how they might be able to fill these gaps, or how they maybe just back up and be a little simpler. I'll suggest that we kind of wrap them into what they do into this study. That's it. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Len. Betsy.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you. Len, you took my thought right out of my head. I run the coordinated plan for the Boston region MPO, and we do it updated every 4 years in alignment with the LRTP, and so the next one will be updated next year. And we do, as part of that plan, we do kind of a rather kind of qualitative, gap analysis, just basically mapping where are what services exist basically in our region, beyond the T, more kind of local and sub-regional and regional services, but it's not a substantial analysis that sounds like maybe you're kind of looking for in terms of more concretely identifying where there are gaps and what we should do, what could be kind of undertaken to fill those gaps. And I know that in conversations with the coffee chats, the transit coffee chats, the human services division of that there's been a lot of interest in kind of taking that next step of, okay, we have this coordinated plan, but like, what can we do? What can we kind of actively do to address some of the things that are in it? So this certainly seems like something that would address that. And if that's something you choose to roll into the coordinated plan as part of the equity program, that's, we could certainly talk about that, or as its own standalone, but I do think it certainly coordinates well with the coordinated plan.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Betsy. David.
Okay. I don't know, I'm just trying to figure out, it seems like we're already doing some of this work and it's a tiny budget. I'm just trying, I don't know. I mean, does it seem like, I mean, don't areas with seniors sort of change over the years all the time as housing turns over? It's not like as much of maybe low income areas, but and don't services change all the time too? Are we just capturing one little moment where the seniors happen to be for this couple years more maybe focused in these areas? Or I guess we said that we got something from the feds about where there's a concentration now of older adults. I don't know. I'm just not sure that how useful this is. Well, like what we're going to get out of this.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Yeah, I think the guidance seems to be maybe hinting at like identifying what the level of access is for like maybe senior centers or other areas where we know there might be consistent concentrations of older adults. But it's a good point and something that, yeah, you want to be sure it wasn't just a changing year to year. And if it was, maybe something to monitor and kind of make part of a database or something to maintain and looking at each year. And I think the equity program does look at that already. So yeah, all good points. Mira.
Thank you, Derek. I just wanted to voice that the advisory board is definitely in support of this, knowing that our members and who we serve is one of our most important roles at the MBTA. And I feel that previously, because we get a lot of public comment, that the older adult population has felt underrepresented, or at least not as valuable as the MBTA system as a whole. So I feel like this is a good step to take a step back to analyze what their needs are. Just as you said, David, that we kind of don't know where that lies. So I think that this data is needed in order to give us a starting point to start addressing the population as it's changing, as more people are being considered in the older adult category. So I definitely want to say that we are behind this 100%.
Thanks, Mira. Tom.
Thank you. I'm just curious to see, how does this tie into, the MBTA's RIDE program? Because I would assume they already have an awful lot of data as to where their demand response is. And then I noticed in the chat, Eric had put something up about the MAPC's taxi program. So, it just seems like there are, a fair amount of different services, and how are you tying all this together? Because it all should tie in under one umbrella, I would think, right? And I'm wondering if the real issue here is people just don't understand or don't know what services are available, and should that be the concentration as to public education about where these things are, what they can do, things like that. So and again, I know Len was happy it was 20 grand. It was but my concern is are we going to be able to do this justice for $20,000? And then ultimately, my real question, I guess, is how's it tie in with other programs that we have ongoing right now? And we should have a ton of data from that also. So it's kind of where I am.
Okay. Thanks, Tom. I guess just kind of logistical question, and this is partly for my own edification as being relatively new in this role, but Sandy and Streleka, will you, for the final version of this universe of projects, will the feedback that's being discussed be taken and kind of incorporated into the descriptions for members to vote on, or do we vote on this existing universe?
So the answer is yes, basically. I mean, we're going to ask you to do a poll or a survey like we've done in the past, and that will be using these existing descriptions, but the concepts can evolve between now and when they're actually in the document. And the final vote will be taken on a draft document that includes more detailed descriptions of each of the studies that you all have selected, and those can definitely evolve from where they are now, both in terms of budget and in terms of what's actually included. So we really do want to take all of this feedback into consideration. I will say that just Betsy mentioned that this topic has come up at the transit working group events that we've done. And I just want to reiterate that's definitely true. There's a real interest in it. I think we'd have to develop a research method for this that kind of blends qualitative and quantitative data and supplements what other people have and other agencies have, instead of duplicating it. But I do think there's a potential value out here if we think about it really carefully.
Thanks, Sandy. Yeah, David.
All right, so it's still confusing to me about, so this clearly is focusing on seniors, right? Not on just people with disabilities. So I don't think we're talking about the ride. I think we're talking about, it seems like we're talking about finding areas, specific areas, right, in the region where right now we have concentrations of seniors. And, how does that play with, like, seniors could take the bus, right? They could take the MBTA. So I'm not sure, are we only talking about areas where seniors are living right now, where they don't have the regular bus? I don't really know. It's just not clear to me what we're looking at.
Okay. Yeah, I think that would have to get fleshed out a bit more in the more full scope of work. And that's something I know that once the problem statement, right, becomes a more full scope, that's at that point, I think we would get into more detail on what exactly we'd be looking at, what data we'd be using. But it's a good point and something that, yeah, I think needs a bit more building out. But conceptually, this was a good discussion, and I'm glad, I think it gives some good direction going forward to scope it out. So any other thoughts on this one? All right. You can move to the next one, Srileka.
So the next project we've got is TE3, assessing mobility options at affordable housing development. This was also submitted by OTP. And this project aims to conduct a site-specific assessment of mobility options for residents at affordable housing communities and evaluate those options through the lens of economic opportunity and accessing essential services, such as medical facilities, jobs, schools, parks, grocery stores, and the like. So this project can be envisioned as an on-the-ground approach to high-level analyses conducted by Conveil and the travel demand model. What I personally had envisioned for this project as well is potentially collaborating with other housing agencies and understanding, which kinds of affordable housing communities have the greatest need for affordable transportation options, or at least accessible transportation options to get to essential services. But I think the study has a lot of opportunity it has the potential for a lot of really impactful data that can really support transportation access development for affordable housing communities. Yeah, you can take questions.
Okay. Thanks, Srileka. Yeah, Daniel.
Thank you. So this, I guess I'm trying to understand partially what's going to be the tasks associated with this. Like when you say it's site-specific assessment, are there going to be case studies of certain locations?
I would say case studies seems like an appropriate avenue, selecting certain affordable housing communities and then conducting the assessment from there, because I don't think this would be like a, for every single development, but maybe it's like a sample of, some communities in more suburban areas versus more urban areas of the region, and then assessing options from there.
Okay. My other immediate thought is that I think something that sometimes comes up as a kind of tension point is around the parking that's provided at affordable housing. And there's some, some folks may argue that, or have argued, at least in Arlington, that some folks that are lower income or at these affordable housing units need parking because they need the sort of freedom or ability to get to places by car for jobs, and they can get to higher paying jobs by car. But of course, car ownership comes with quite a lot of costs to begin with. And so I think that how to sort of balance this out of these two different, and then of course, every parking space you add to affordable housing increases the cost of that development, significantly. So there's usually, affordable housing developments that try to lower that, I think, limit the amount of parking, that they have, or get some waiver of requirements for that, if it's not already, something that's in the zoning code. But I guess and then one other thing I guess I'm thinking about is the sort of I guess I'm trying to understand this sort of locational or geographic aspect of where these are located within, are these being located within places that are accessible to transit, or on frequent transit lines? Is there some opportunity to look at the bus network redesign and see, if that was the outcome of that, would there be more affordable housing developments that are along bus, higher frequency bus routes, so I guess there's a lot of different things packed into here, and I see it as a pretty large budget, that I think needs to be, I think it's a good idea. I'm just trying to, sort of understand in my mind how all the different kind of factors that would need to be included in here. Thanks.
Thanks, Daniel. Yeah, I could, on your point about kind of geography, I know that in future of the curve, there were like different geography types taken. And if there were something like a case study style approach, I could see kind of picking different contexts, like more suburban or urban, or, inner core type, picking kind of a few from different subregions and looking at access needs across all those different areas and what options exist. So, but yeah, so all good points and stuff to flesh out. Eric.
Yeah, I had some of the similar thoughts about who sort of is the audience for this work, and I think Daniel raises some interesting questions about more suburban sites with higher rates of affordability, or even sites that like housing authorities are managing, and understanding sort of the relationship with parking and transportation. But I like the idea, if we move forward with this, of looking at different potential sites across the region. But I do think a question of kind of like, what is the who's the audience? What are we? What are we trying to understand here? I think is a little deeper interrogation of that question. But certainly, I think this is a body of work that could fit with some of the MPO's funding programs, like community connections, like having ideas for improvements for projects for that program. I was just going to respond for Daniel. Daniel, we're also doing a body of work in a number of sort of Metro West, sort of communities west of Boston, looking at kind of updating our perfect fit parking research and looking at parking usage in multifamily sites in Newton and in a number of other municipalities, water towns west of Boston. And one of the questions we're kind of trying to ask in that body of work is is what's the amount of parking utilization at sites with sort of higher rates of affordability. So that can also kind of help answer some of the issues you raised. But yeah, just wanted to.
Thanks, Eric. Yeah, I know it says transit providers as an audience here, but I think municipalities might be a more appropriate audience when it comes to thinking about unique needs of affordable housing, residents and access needs. And so when it comes to setting things like guidelines for new development or mitigation or anything like that, and then for existing development, what are the access needs? It would give municipalities maybe a framework to think about those considerations for the affordable housing in their respective municipalities. So that might need to get revised. But yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, Steve.
Yeah, the price here is noticeably larger, especially compared with the previous one. And the range of that price, that's, you know, a 50% range. That's a lot, a range at this point. And I guess the question would be, how many different places will we be looking at? And how does that affect that price? So I think that needs to be refined quite a bit before we go on. How many we're going to do and what's the real price of this going to be?
Good point. Thanks, Steve. Yeah, Len.
Yeah, Steve said a fair amount of what I was thinking. So I imagine the cost could be affected by how many places we looked, and I'm kind of curious as to what we are getting out of the higher level conveyor analysis, because I think when it comes to transit, we could probably figure out where people are going, you know, by looking at ODX data. I know it takes money to do that, you know, so I'm not saying we have that information for free, unless we already have the information, and it takes less to just do the analysis of it. Is it, and I put this out there, you don't have to answer this now, but is it far-fetched to think about wrapping the previous study into this one? And just put that out there. That's it. Thank you.
Oh, good point, Len. I mean, yeah, there's certainly overlap between all of this and the CHST plan and the equity program at large. So I think there are multiple opportunities to study both of these. Yeah, go ahead, David.
I think I have the same sense as some of the others. Yeah, it just feels like some of the studies that we talked about the last couple of weeks seem more beneficial to our region. I just feel like we can get more out of some of those other studies. You know, I'm not so excited about this. I'm not sure what would we really, if we have a couple case studies, like what are we going to find out? That, you know, if you put affordable housing in urban areas, they have better access to transit, and the stores and hospitals are closer anyway. And if you put affordable housing in the suburban areas, we're going to find out that they depend more on vehicles and maybe they need better sidewalks or, you know, a local shuttle or something. And we'll find out that it's probably not a great place to put big affordable housing in rural areas, right? So like what else are we going to find out about it? I'm not sure. Maybe I'm missing the point here.
No, it's a good point. I think one thing I had in mind in submitting is like almost a documentation of among the affordable housing, where we know there's concentration of affordable housing in specific contexts, say suburban areas, which ones are lacking access right now to opportunities. So like, and that would be part of, I think, the selection of where they would. So like Conveil and other tools could be used to look at, you know, where is there particularly bad access right now to key destinations or to food among affordable housing communities or developments in those areas, and what might be able to be said about access needs and what recommendations might be broadly applicable to other areas. And you're right, I think a lot of it is just kind of, we do know right now, but it would be a little bit of a needs assessment specifically through the lens of affordable housing. So those were some thoughts behind suggesting this, but go ahead, Tom.
Thank you. In previous life, I was chair of the Somerville Housing Authority. So, I'm very familiar with basically the older style housing developments that were built by the federal government and the state years ago. And, a lot of affordable housing, concentrated in multiple areas across the city. And, so that's kind of the old model. The new model now, like in our zoning, we have a requirement of 20% affordable housing in all new developments. So it's not, affordable housing isn't going to be concentrated in any one particular area anymore. It's going to be, it's basically, mixed housing, throughout the city and all these new developments. So, and I'm assuming more and more cities and towns are probably looking at doing it in that approach. I know some of the developers here had proposed to do what they called like family housing, and so instead of having it in a 20-story apartment tower, they were going to build like a 6-story building that would have more amenities and things like that for families, but that was totally shut down by city council. That they felt like it was segregating, families into a building and things like that. So, it had its merits, but I can see why, they didn't want to do that. So I guess, from my point, and I assume in the inner core, you're going to see more of that type of situation. So I'm not sure what the study would do here. Here we have like 3 or 4 major, housing authority developments. That, pretty much, especially now with the Green Line, everybody's going to be within a 15-minute walk of housing. So, I'm not sure what a few people have talked about is the target audience here. And then I know, the state is pushing, and I was on the front page of the Globe again, I think over the weekend, to have more affordable housing built out in the suburbs and in other areas like that. So, would the study be focusing more, out there where, transit would be more of a problem maybe? So again, I just feel like we don't have enough detail on this to, help me make a decision, and especially where it's a budget between 100 and 150,000. I think I'd need a little bit, I need this kind of honed down a little bit so I have a better understanding as to what the end goal on this one is. I think it'd be a good study, but I gotta get a better feeling as to where it would, what's the concentration and where it would be. Thanks.
Thanks, Tom. All right. So not seeing any other hands raised, so I think we can move to the last one, Srilekha.
Right. And our last study is TE4, the Chelsea Freight Electrification Study. So submitted by our very own Sandy Johnston. Study is seeking to advance the electrification of freight in key industries and encompasses the light industrial and industrial areas of Boston, including Chelsea, Everett, and Revere. And I'll pass this along to Sandy, who will speak way more eloquently on this topic.
Thanks, Leica. So this one is a little bit complicated. I'm going to take a minute to explain where it's coming from. Wearing my freight planner hat, I and some of my colleagues at MAPC were approached by the city of Chelsea to think about this scope that they had put together for what they were calling a freight electrification study. And that's actually, I think, the scope, the language that you have here on the screen, which was originally submitted by the city of Chelsea, is a little bit of a misnomer because the concept has been evolving as we discuss it amongst ourselves and with stakeholders. And really the way we're approaching it now is looking at it as a regional or sub-regional freight decarbonization study. And the difference between electrification and decarbonization is that we will be looking at electrification, but also at mode shift, because this is an area that has water options, that has rail options, that has, first and last mile potential freight bike options. Lots of different things to potentially look at, and the geography that we'd be looking at would be not just the city of Chelsea, which is important, but is very small geographically, but also Everett, and Winthrop, East Boston, and Revere, which kind of form a geographically and socioeconomically and logistically, meaning like logistics industry wise, coherent unit. And so we've been working on developing that scope and talking to the stakeholders, myself and Allison Felix and Travis Pollock and Jesse Way at MAPC. And we're not ready to present anything yet, but we're thinking that at the scale that this is going to be, we're probably going to have to kind of splash together several funding sources for it. And we might end up going, I have some funding that we have through the freight program for fiscal year 23. There's other funding out there, but we wanted to bring this to the UPWP committee first to make you aware of this development, and because we thought that you would be interested in this study and potentially interested in putting some funding toward it. That being said, if you choose not to pursue this, we will likely be pursuing other options for funding, though we don't quite know the landscape of what is out there yet, or how it would be. We would put all the funding package together. So I'm happy to answer more questions. I'm sure folks will have.
Thanks, Sandy. Yeah, Steve.
Yeah, this sounds really good. Again, we now have a budget for freight studies, but this sounds like a specific study that could be done in addition to what the base amount is spent on your freight studies. And we haven't had something related to freight on the UPWP and I don't know how long. So I think this would be a good thing to do. Obviously, the title needs to change because it's not just Chelsea, and it's not just electrification. So it's I don't know, something like net zero goals for freight in the area, something like that. Again, you want to consider all modes of transportation, but of course all of them need to be electrified. The ferry boats need to be electrified. So there's a lot here that can you can do to show what the path is to really taking freight in the area and getting it to the net zero for climate change. So I'm definitely, I like this.
Okay. Thanks, Steve. Len.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The word I would use, Sandy, is complex. Not complicated. I like complex. Complicated, it's like, oh, it's a whole other animal. But I'm just playing around. But I like the interconnectedness of this. And we're gonna learn a lot from doing something like this. Whoever does it, and yeah, I guess we could not spend the money on it because it seems like it's gonna get done one way or another. But I would like to see us be a part of the collaborative that works on this. And so I'm just happy to see something like this proposed because there's just, I think, so much we can learn from it. That's it. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Len. Daniel.
Thank you, and thanks, Sandy. I mean, I think this is extremely interesting, and I think the way that you described it is great. Obviously, need to update the description and title and everything. And I think Steve has a good point about the decarbonization aspect. Even if you're moving it to water or rail, there's, those are not carbon free either. But I mean, I think it maybe changes maybe changes the profile of how exactly that, how much like greenhouse gas emissions are being used by those other modes. But and I love the incorporation of the sort of bicycle freight also, and obviously you sure about. I mean, I don't know a lot about it, but I know Boston is doing its own kind of bike freight transportation study of some kind. And hopefully that the legislature will move on the electric bike bill that's before them this year. So that would be great to have that too. So yeah, I think it's really. And the last thing is that I agree also with Len that putting some money to this to leverage, if it's possible, to use it as leverage for other funds or to incorporate into other funding for a larger study, I think is a good use of our money. So thank you.
Daniel, Tom.
Thank you. Through you to Sandy. Sandy, is this part of another study that's going on, or is this going to be like our own study? Or is it going to be part of a bigger ongoing study?
This is kind of a standalone thing. I mean, I think we will be developing it in parallel with MassDOT's new freight plan, which is going to be launching work on soon. So I think, there will be some synergies there. And as somebody pointed out earlier, I forget who, I think Steve, that this is going to kind of coexist with the MPO's regular freight planning and alongside it. And I'll be, I'm, as the freight planning manager, I'll be doing work on both. But this is what we're envisioning here is a real kind of standalone effort at some significant scale.
And another question is part of the study. One of the big issues with all this is, actually, power generation. We're talking about electrifying everything, but nobody's talking about, increasing, power plants, distribution areas. I know we have an issue here in Somerville where, of course, everybody wants everything to go green, but then when Eversource starts submitting that they need to put in additional, substations and things like that, nobody wants them in their backyard, so there's a huge issue with all this that I feel, and of course, this is my field, so I see it all the time, right? But I feel is, again, I think we definitely need to go this way. There's no doubt about that. But we have to start bringing in the utilities and things like that as to how, how they're going to back all this up and, protect the grid and all that. And then just as a last thing, I know it's not a freight, but, they've been talking about electrifying the commuter rail forever. And, I'm not quite sure where that is. I know our state delegation's been pushing for it for years. And, I think in Somerville, we have almost all the commuter rail lines run through here, but none of them stop here. So, and a lot of them are idling, constantly overnight and things like that. So, the pollution in the air with that too is, it just seems like to me that whether it's freight or commuter rail, it would be, the goal should be to electrifying all this and figuring out in the regionally, how would you do that? What's the cost on it, because you have to upgrade all your engines, things like that. And then ultimately, how you're going to get the power there, how the distribution and all that. So it's a huge task. And I guess maybe you have to take it in pieces and then build on it. Maybe that's what the thought here is. But, I think it's the right way to go. And but I'd like to see the bigger picture on it all,
Yeah, thanks, Tom. I think you're absolutely right. It has to be done in pieces. And I think part of the reason that this is a good fit for the MPO and MAPC to be working on is that there's, lots of work being done elsewhere on electric vehicles, even on rail, and freight is such a narrow niche that not a lot of people are aware of or work on. But to your point about the need to be thinking about the grid and not just the infrastructure of the grid, but actually the fuels that are powering the grid. I was just on a webinar, read a report last week about basically saying that, okay, we can electrify trucks, but that's only going to get us a third of the way to the goal of complete decarbonization, given the fuel mix that's powering the grid right now. And it does eliminate local tailpipe emissions, but if we don't clean the grid up and install sufficient power infrastructure to utilize that clean grid, then we're only eliminating local emissions and not the greenhouse gas emissions, which are also a problem. So yeah, I think I'm hopeful that we can be very cognizant of that.
Thank you. David.
So I thought I should chime in to say that I like this idea too. And I really like the comments from all of you. I think this is really different and, interesting and relevant. And so I just think we should keep considering this and trying to figure out what piece of this the MPO can take on to sort of help So we'll see where this goes. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, David. Yeah, and like Sandy mentioned, there is going to be an update to the MassDOT freight plan happening shortly, and there's another study looking at the new bill requires us to look at alternative fuel designated corridors, and so there's a scope of work right now for that as well to look at the National Electric Vehicle Program. So there's some overlaps there as well, and I know Sandy said he's already coordinating with the folks in OTP working on those. So. But just mentioning that here as well. So
MassDOT also has an active study on Route 1A in East Boston. I've been coordinating with Doug Johnson at OTP, who's running that study. So
awesome. Yep. Perfect. Sounds good. Great. So that's the last study on the universe. Did you want to talk a little bit about next steps, Srileka?
Yes, so next steps for us at MPO staff is to create and distribute a survey to members and to staff for really asking for your input and also for starting to rank these study ideas. So that is in development, and that should be coming your way in the next week or so. What that means for meetings is that the next meeting will likely not be before, it won't be in 2 weeks, it's likely going to be in 3 or 4 weeks. So we have enough time to send the survey out, get results and process those results, and then turn those back to you in a meeting. So tangible next steps for the committee is to please participate in the survey, and please be thinking about how we're ranking these study ideas and which ones, of course, we have all the feedback that you've given us, and thank you so much for that, to see, where people's interests are leaning more towards and which projects seem to have, more things to refine, more details to flesh out. So we're really looking forward to hearing your input from the survey and sort of finalizing the process of firming up these study ideas and moving further, developing the final universe.
That's good. So the committee will not be meeting next week then? Is that on May 26th?
No.
Okay. All right.
No.
Sounds good. Yeah. So once the survey is out and responses are compiled, then we'll come up with a meeting date and let folks know then. Sounds good. Okay. Any other questions on that process before we go into member items? All right. Seeing none. So that sounds good. And yeah, good. Oh, yeah, Eric, go ahead.
My overall question is just, and I apologize if we've discussed this already. What is the date where we're looking to bring a recommendation to the MPO?
I believe we had targeted the first meeting in July to have a draft UPWP done.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Sounds good. And I guess one question I had, I mean, maybe it's not going to factor into the ranking as much, but is there a sense of how much funding is generally allocated to these discrete studies overall, or is that still getting worked out with the other UPWP task development? I guess to what degree should members factor in the amount of funding availability into this evaluation?
So my understanding, Sandy, you can.
No, go ahead.
My understanding is that the specific budgets for discrete studies are still being fleshed out. From my, I would say that budgets should factor in somewhat, but just keeping in mind that the overall budget, I think, for discrete studies is anticipated to increase. Sandy, you want to jump in? Is that sort of?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I know Tegan's not here, who would normally speak to this. But I know folks that aren't in CTVS management are actively working on the budget, as they always are this time of year. And we can, send it up the ranks to request an update on that process if the committee would like that.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just thinking like if there are limited resources, it's helpful to know. So yeah, any update is good, but I think the main thing is just getting a sense of the priority of the conceptual ideas. So, but just thought I'd ask in case folks were curious. Okay, so then the next item is member items. Are there any updates or items that any members have? All right, seeing none. The agenda item 5 is next meeting, so I think we already covered that. So we'll be in touch as we know when they're meeting. And so if there are no other items, I think we can ask for a motion and second to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Is there a
Second.
All right, all in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, without objection, we're adjourned. Thank you, everybody, and good work, Srileka and Sandy and staff. And yeah, we'll be in touch with next steps. So have a great day, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good one.
Nice job.
Thank you. Why can't I end this meeting? There we go.
You should be able to. That was a really good conversation.
Yeah, it was. That was really engaging. I'm glad it all worked out the way it is. And yeah, I think we definitely need to push on the 2023 stuff now.
Yeah.
So I will do that.
Excellent. Thank you.
All right. See you all later.
Yeah.